Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. I'd like to invite Ms. Clay to remain at the podium and Ms. McCrary to join her at the podium, our new Chief Learning and Performance Officer, to provide informational item C2C, the Comprehensive ARPA Plan Update. Ms. Clay and Ms. McCrary.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board, and Superintendent Davis. Almost 1 year ago, in August of 2021, the board endorsed plans for the first allocation of funds authorized by the American Rescue Plan Act, allowing us to seek approval from the Georgia Department of Education to access the funding support for our schools and the district. Today, Ms. McCrary and I will share an update on the processes conducted to develop the plans for the final phase of investments, and we will seek endorsement of the comprehensive ARPA plan during the business portion of the meeting today. As a reminder, the ARPA funds are the third installment of the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief, or ESSER, funding authorized by the federal government in recognition that school systems needed additional funds to keep schools open and students learning in the pandemic. Board, you will recall the first award of ESSER funds was authorized by the CARES Act in March of 2020. And later that year in December, there was a passage of a second round of ESSER funds we commonly refer to as CARES 2 funds. Awarded in the midst of the pandemic, the ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 allocations can best be summarized as supporting crisis management and then paving the path to recovery, respectively. Authorized in March of 2021, the federal government voiced strongly that the primary purpose of the ARPA funds is to support the reopening of schools safely, sustaining their safe operations, and addressing students' social, emotional, mental, health, and physical needs, and the academic needs resulting from the pandemic. The emphasis was no longer on the management of schools in crisis, but instead the focus was shifted to safe reopenings of schools and their operations, and deep investments in learning recovery, learning acceleration, and addressing the unprecedented needs of students. In April of 2021, the approach to determine investment needs and prepare a comprehensive plan for the ARPA funds was shared with the board. Shown here for reference, this system has guided the first phase of our investments and continues to function as our guiding practice for what we will share today. As you recall, the ARPA formula granted Henry County Schools $53.4 million, and this was subgranted from the Georgia Department of Education into two phases. I'll review the first phase, where 2/3 of the grant amount were available for planning responses to the identified needs. The investments in Phase 1 were determined with stakeholder feedback and were allocated into the categories of investments or buckets that are shown here. Board, you are aware that much of this investment centered around the opening of school, supporting the realities of COVID interruptions with the Quarantine Bridge program for students who couldn't attend school in person due to their quarantine assignment, building tools and resources for the new mental health and wellness facilitators, and to support the new Impact Academy full virtual program, amongst other more long-range investments that are listed here as well. Following the board's endorsement actions, we submitted our application to the Georgia Department of Education and obtained approval to access the funds during the 21-22 school year. I will now turn the report over to Ms. McCrary to discuss our preparations for the final phase of the application for the remaining 1/3 of funding.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board, and Madam Superintendent. We intentionally waited to invest the final funds so that we didn't make investments for multiple years that only needed to be in place for this transition year. And in order to see what the real student needs would be as the 21-22 year concluded and the realities of the new normal could be studied. We are now ready to make those investments of the remaining third in the amount of approximately $18.7 million. The beginning of the cycle to determine the needed investments in Phase 2 began in late November through the winter holidays to solicit feedback from our community about their perspectives on what was still needed now that the first semester was concluding. 335 members of the community completed the survey with 2,680 individual responses to 8 questions about needed investments, gave us much to consider about the existing investments and those that still needed to be considered. Some feedback validated those existing investments, with several respondents mentioning a need for updated student learning devices and technology. As you know, you already prepared for that investment in our eSPLOS referendum, and we will be using eSPLOS funds to replace student learning devices for next school year. Additional community members noted a need to focus on student safety and personal health. With the continued funding of mental health and wellness facilitators, this need is also evident in Phase 2 of our ARPA investments. After carefully assessing the needs articulated from our community and the knowledge of what the investments need to be now after a year of leading, teaching, and learning in this new environment, we are ready to seek approval again from the Georgia Department of Education for the final investment of the ARPA funds. Going back to our investment categories or buckets, you can see the items that will make up the final request for funds. In blue are items previously endorsed by the board that will carry over into the new investment period. And in the yellow section are the investments to be made after determining the needs as I mentioned on the previous slide. This includes a class of early kindergarten will start next summer at every elementary school. This model is designed to give rising kindergartners more time to succeed on kindergarten standards with a focus on literacy and to mitigate variability in access to pre-K in our community. An investment will be made to review our course schedules at every one of our schools to ensure that our students have recovered all the course gaps that may have occurred during the pandemic, while also ensuring that we are advancing access and opportunities for rigorous course opportunities for every student in every school. The schedule audit involves an analysis of every school schedule to gain a deeper picture of the Henry County Schools student journey. The data and insights gleaned from this deep, comprehensive analysis of our schedules empowers us to celebrate points of pride and provides us with the information on scheduling adjustments, courses available, and leader training needed, and will help us evaluate the opportunities and access provided to our students. We will expend ARPA dollars to continue the School of Scholars. The first year has demonstrated many points of success for the more than 40 students served in this therapeutic setting. The ARPA dollars will position us to continue the K-5 program and expand it to serve grades 6 through 8 in middle school as well. And lastly, we have ARPA funds that will ensure the replacement of classroom and media center materials not returned during the pandemic closure of 2020. Our approach to ARPA planning and reporting continues to be recognized nationally, and we have maintained this approach, always starting with the observation of a gap or need, coupled with insights from stakeholders, which is followed by planning and implementation. And now we will engage in deep monitoring for effectiveness in order to determine the investments that will continue beyond the availability of federal funds. Think about the impact these funds have had on our ability to make an on-campus learning experience available to 98% of our students this past year, and build the largest virtual school in the state of Georgia at Impact Academy. We provided a one-of-a-kind quarantine bridge program so that students never lost connection to their learning, even when they were assigned health quarantines, and we implemented a unique evening virtual program for students in elementary schools. As we enter the final third plan for ARPA funds for Henry County Schools, we will maintain the transparency of our planning, preparation, and progress. Let me turn it back over to Shanika to conclude this report.
As I close, I would like to encourage the board and the community to visit the ESSER webpage for more information on the authorizing legislations, the allocation process, and Henry County Schools' planning and management practices of these federal funds. We launched this website last year, and we are committed to keeping all stakeholders abreast of how the elementary and secondary school emergency relief funds are being invested on behalf of students. This site is updated upon the completion of quarterly financials, and the next scheduled update will occur in August with the availability of our year-end financials. Madam Superintendent, that concludes what we have prepared, and we turn the floor back to you.
Thank you, Ms. Clay. Madam Chair, that concludes what we have prepared, but remain available for any discussion.